if there are events in my life that pointed me in any direction. This was all pretty serendipitous. I was getting my PhD in sociology, doing work on environmental protection efforts around the world and NGOs and development, and had never taken a business class, never worked for a company. I tell all my students that the first day just to set the bar where it should be. But it was right when my department was, they had a deep appreciation for disciplinary scholarship, and was interested in the kind of organizational work that I was doing. And it was also when we were starting a social enterprise center. Being a sociologist and kind of being informed by the pragmatist tradition of just confronting problems as they exist, valuing facts and trying to understand the world, came apparent to me that business is a part of society. And this is a really opportunity for the business school to take on these big social and environmental issues. And there's a lot of sociological concepts too that we take for granted that help explain organizations, things like unintended consequences, bureaucracy, myth and ceremony. These all emerge as a way to explain organizations.
So I worked in industry for many years before I moved to academia, and I did my PhD, etc. And I worked at the Coca-Cola company. One of my assignments was in China. So I was there almost 3 years. And in one of the group meetings, we took a trip to Inner Mongolia. And as part of that trip, we went to visit an orphanage that the company helped fund, helped support. So we spent a day with the kids that live there. And even though we didn't speak the language, we played football together, soccer. I was part of the leadership team of the Coca-Cola China business. I had been there by then about 2 years, and I had never heard of this. I'd never heard about this investment. And then I started wondering what other things is the company investing in this intersection of business and society, either environmental issues or social issues. And how are they connected to the way they are thinking about growth? How are they communicating that to stakeholders, to employees, to customers? And what I realized fairly quickly is that those efforts were really separated. Whoever was in charge of addressing kind of community or environmental issues was working on the sidelines of the business. They were not in the room when resource allocation was being made. They were not in the room where growth decisions were being made. And I started wondering, first of all, why and what would happen if they were. I was not in China long enough to really explore that interest, but that was the interest that eventually I brought to my PhD program, and my dissertation was focused on the notion of stakeholder management in marketing. And from there on, I've been really passionate about understanding that relationship in the context of growth for corporations, and then talking to anybody who will listen to me about why things need to be different.
One, I have a set of core values in my class that I think are also core values of business, things like equity and transparency. Brian Stevens' idea of proximity, asking uncomfortable questions and trying to bring those values into the classroom as a way to say, these are values of business and society as well. And let's unpack those. And I think it is a way to kind of ground the class in this broader sense of the purpose of business. If you look at employers, some of the qualities that they really want to see in college students that are coming into jobs are critical thinking skills, written and oral communication skills, some teamwork and leadership skills. And they don't think that our students are always prepared for those. And so we do a lot of those in my class. There's a lot of peer review, a lot of writing, a lot of critical thinking exercises, because I think that if you want to communicate, for example, a business case for addressing the climate crisis, but you need to be able to read climate science. You have to be able to communicate that to upper level management. You have to build support. You have to understand why it's important for your business. And those are communication skills. I think another modality is really just the importance of representation. So being really intentional in what we're assigning in a business and society class. And so doing our best to feature diverse protagonists in our cases, being thoughtful about the authors and the backgrounds of authors that we're assigning, and really taking the idea of teaching business the way we want it to be, rather than the way it has been, is really important.
So I created this case about the Center of Civil Rights and Civil and Human Rights here in Atlanta, where I use as the context for them to apply a lot of the class concepts in developing a marketing strategy and a marketing plan. While they are learning about applying some of the methods that we discuss in class, they are embedding themselves and getting exposed to all the wealth of learning and knowledge that resides in that center. And it has always been the case so far that less than 5% of my students have actually attended the center before the class starts. And 100% of them have not only attended, but have really discussed in detail the issues that are raised in that center by the end of the class. I'm starting a new class. It's a mid-semester module of sorts, which is a very small, short class. It's 15 hours. And that's competing on social impact. So in that class, I will focus specifically on how companies are using or thinking about societal needs in their innovation processes to develop products and services to compete in the marketplace, but in a way that actually could help advance or contribute to addressing some of the bigger societal issues.
We hear it a lot in universities and business schools, the importance of experiential learning, but I think it is vital to what we do. Our students help teach workshops for women coffee growers in Central America and collaborating with students from Central America to deliver those workshops in storytelling and marketing and finance to help women coffee growers get access to better markets. I've traveled with students down to coffee farms in Central America. I took them to the climate change negotiations in Paris. And there is something to be said about having that immersive experience. We also have a philanthropy class where our students give $50,000 to $75,000 to local nonprofits every spring. That's a way for them to put real dollars into action, but also understand issues of inequity in Atlanta. These are ways for our students to get a better sense of the community around them, but also make those philanthropic gifts to understand on the donor side, what does that process look like? We're always trying to find innovative ways to give those experiences to our students so that they can bridge that theory they learn in the class with action in the real world.
Part of what makes it so critical is a lot of our students really have a tangential relationship with the broader societal issue. They've been working for 10 years or so on finance or on a business, and they have thought about issues of climate change or issues of inequity external to their job. So it is important that as they go through their training at Goizueta, they leave us no longer thinking of those issues as tangential or separate, but really understanding how those issues connect to leading a business today.
And our Start Me team often says that there are three things that are necessary for an entrepreneur to be successful. And they need access to knowledge, they need access to networks, they need access to capital. Since we have this tremendous network of mentors that have been really beneficial, but also what's great about the Start Me program and the Grounds for Empowerment program is that there's cohort effects as well. And it's a community among the entrepreneurs, they become a network in themselves. And I think that's really important. If you think about a place like Emory, you sometimes take those networks for granted. We're a massive organization. You kind of know in a company who to go to for help. It's a lot harder for an entrepreneur trying to start a small business. It's tough to know who to go to. And so that mentorship aspect and then the community of entrepreneurs themselves, I think is really what makes that those programs special.
I did a study of small business owners, Hispanic and Latinx small business owners in Georgia about 2 years ago. And we studied about over 500 businesses. And some of the themes that Wes mentioned were also present in that study. The one thing I would add, and these were in many cases, micro businesses. One thing I would add is the support for family activities, like things like childcare, transportation, things that, frankly, sometimes we take for granted. For them, particularly women business owners, where the difference between them being able to have their business or not, if they had access to childcare specifically.
I'd like to think that we do it in a couple of ways. One is what we do as an institute. It's important that we have a strong research mission, and that defines a lot of our work. It's important that we communicate that research to make it accessible to the broader business community. So that's bringing light to facts and truth is really important. We also value transparency, and so the ethic of transparency shapes a lot of our work in the coffee industry. And so our specialty coffee transaction guide is to bring transparent prices to coffee farmers so that they know how much their coffee is worth. But I think there is a bigger conversation about the role of technology in our society that creates misinformation or spreads misinformation. And I hope that the Institute can be a place where we can convene some of those conversations. To be frank, a lot of the digital tools that transform marketing and consumer behavior have sort of taken on a life of their own. And they're used to spread harmful misinformation, not by the marketers, but by other agents. We need to create a world where we are embedding technology in society rather than embedding society in technological tools. I think there's a lot of work being done in business schools right now to call attention to that, to say we can't rely so much on technocratic solutions because they have these unintended consequences. Those tools have delegitimated institutions, right? It's broken down trust in science. It's broken down trust in scientific authority. I like to think that the Institute can be a place where we can convene some of those conversations, because I think business has a role to play in reclaiming the good of technology and preventing the spread of harmful misinformation. I've noticed a lot of changes. So a few years ago, the best comment I got on my teaching evaluations was, this class is like an episode of John Oliver without all the funny parts, and which I always like. In some ways, I like to think that I'm funny, but maybe I'm not. But it was sort of this way to explain the world and understand like how everything is interconnected. Now students are coming to class with those questions on the first day, right? And they're so much more aware of these big systemic challenges because it's become part of our public discourse, and they're confronting it every day. So that's changed, that we're starting the conversations now at a different place than we were 4 or 5 years ago. I think it's just shown me, like, I think what the business and society class and the other classes that we offer to the Institute, what we offer to a business education more broadly is this stakeholder perspective. I'm asking this question: what's the long-term impact of these decisions on stakeholders? That includes your shareholders, that includes your employees, broader communities, that includes the climate. I like to think that it enhances and deepens a business education when you can sort of expand those time horizons and think about your impact and think about value in a much more comprehensive way. Makes it a lot harder to define and measure, but I think that's what we're here for, is to figure out how to do that. Social change and culture change is not going to happen by pulling any kind of single lever. We all have to sort of start to make changes in our own lives, changes in our organizational lives. We need to make changes in our policies if we want to tackle these big systemic issues. And so all of us have a role to play. It also means that we're not all going to solve it. And so it's putting ourselves into context, but recognizing that we could all do something in our professional lives and our personal lives for the issues that we care about.
To the point that Wes was saying earlier, I think that in the past, maybe it was us creating awareness among students on the importance of some of these issues. I think now there's an expectation among many of them that this is part of the way that business is taught, and that there's space for these conversations in maybe every class. Part of what we're trying to do at the Institute is, spreading the presence of business and society topics across more classes. And we're fortunate we have a faculty team that it's already there.
Agencies, organizations that rank business schools talk about how they're going to start ranking business schools on social impact and sustainability. It used to be that if you cared about an issue of inequity or climate change, you would go get a public policy degree or a law degree, and you can still do that, but more and more students are coming to business schools to also think about what role does business play. If you look at employee surveys, overwhelmingly, employees want their executives to come out and make public statements. The business and society relationship has been evolving, not just for the last 10 years, for the last 300 years. And this is just the latest phase of it. But I think for some of our students, it's changing the understanding of what a business school could be.
Things like the UN report about the consensus about more than 250 scientists and 14,000 studies on the state of climate change, and what are we, what can we expect if we don't reverse course. Those things motivate me tremendously. What can I do in my class, in the little piece of the puzzle that I participate in, to expand and increase the sense of urgency?
6 months ago, the UN Secretary General said that we are staring at the edge of an abyss, and it kind of feels like we're in the abyss now for climate change, and that's frightening, but it is motivating in the ways that Omar described. I also always tell my students that I have 2 young daughters. I have no choice but to be optimistic, and I'm optimistic because someday they'll be their managers and advisors and mentors. And so if they could create the business world that I want my daughters to grow up in, then I've done my job. I also think it's important to look to history, obviously not all of it. Granted, the problems in front of us are tough and they are unique, whether it be the pandemic or climate change or the movement for racial justice. These are big systemic issues. We have solved problems before. And I think if you look to the past, some international environmental agreements, for example, that worked, like around the ozone layer, that does give us some sense of collaboration and cooperation is possible. And so I think there's some optimism that comes from looking back to history. There's also a part of me that has always found a lot to admire in Buddhist philosophy, this idea that, you know, suffering is inevitable. The only thing we can do to change it is to just practice compassion. And I think compassion is an optimistic belief, and I try and practice that when I can. It's not always easy, because as a sociologist, I'm like structurally sad all the time. All we think about is how broken the world is, and we can't do a lot to fix it. Being in a business school, there's that entrepreneurial energy that I just love, and students who want to go out and disrupt things and try things, and that also keeps me motivated.